Okay, so hello. Welcome to Wisdom and Insight series. I'm Michael Zatella, and I will be giving you the tour through this class. I believe last one I said it was the fifth, but I think last one was actually the sixth in the series. So this is number 7. So we're coming down the home stretch here. Before I go into things. Does anybody have any home practice related questions, anything that has come up related to practice since we met last? Feel free to unmute yourself and just speak. Hello, Nicole.
Well, my question to you is so I find that I'm cycling through feeling, hearing, and seeing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost like it's so much to keep track of, and because like I find that I'm also like feeling inside and trying to listen and noting, okay, I'm hearing my thoughts, I'm seeing things in my thoughts. Could I be overcomplicating this?
Well, I think that what you are saying is very much within the realm of normal reporting. At first, it seems like, oh my gosh, I am just juggling a lot of balls here. This is complex activity. It's frenetic. I keep dropping them. Really, do I want to go to clown school? I'm now retroactively second guessing all of my life decisions. No, but yeah, there is that sense of it can feel like a lot. Now then, Michael, are you doing this? Are you talking about exclusively the meditation practice, or as you're going through the day?
Oh, the meditation practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you having any moments where it feels a little bit restful and a little bit kind of like organizing? Or do you feel like you're kind of at the tail end of the whip that you're constantly just kind of moving around frenetically?
Uh, yeah, definitely on the tail end of that whip. It seems like a lot of doing, and that might be one of the problems there.
Okay, good.
Well, you tell me. Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, especially at first, it's a newer technique. A
Yeah.
lot of all the different practices that I do and I teach to people, whenever we enter into the see, hear, feel practices, uh, people's initial response is, boy, that's a lot of activity. And people struggle a bit to connect with it. Howsoever, might I encourage you to stay with it, because once it clicks, and there's a certain point where it will click, it becomes somewhat the Swiss Army knife of meditation techniques, because there's a way in which we can parse our experience out and then emphasize what aspect of it, being able to discern the activity in see, hear, feel. Or we can look at the opposite. Where's it restful? And maybe this might be the goal for you for next week. Rather than looking at the images that arise and being aware of when that activity is happening, can you be aware when it's see, rest? There are moments where there's nothing happening but the backs of your eyelids. Can you be aware of the moments of hear rest, where there's no internal talk, but it's all just silence in between the ears? Can you be aware of the moments of feel rest, where it's rather than the aches and pains and the emotions, there can be the feelings of the restfulness, the relaxation, the openings and flow. So, you can play with it a little bit. If you want, you can just kind of move into noticing the facets and features of restfulness within that experience. And what you'll get there is a bit of a shamatha vipassana, in terms of it's emphasizing the calming, cooling aspects of the practice, while kind of discerning what is kind of, the makeup of self, and kind of the more of the self going into remission. All of the content of seeing, hearing, feeling bops back and forth and tend to become nutrients for each other. There's this sound that triggers this image of this idea, that triggers this emotional reaction, which calls to mind this memory that has a strong kind of verbal content to it. And then it's like the pinball machine. Awareness is bouncing back and forth as it's creating a sense of self. If we focus on the restful qualities, we can see how, there's the absence of that activity. And maybe the restfulness in here space might have a bit of a soothing effect on seeing and feeling, and vice versa, all three, trimodally, in which case the restfulness in one can support the restfulness in the rest. And what is it like? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say that, and maybe it's because I have like a background in music, but when I'm listening, I'm really at rest in that modality. And I think it's just really, I'm not used to turning inward so much, and it feels like I'm scrambling to just like stay focused on, what is that feeling in there, noting it. Oh, that's just gas, like kind of thing back and forth. But I think maybe I just need to practice on some of these more unfamiliar modes of consciousness so that I can reach a restfulness.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think so.
absolutely. You said your background is in music, or?
Yeah, I played trumpet for like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Yay.
Vanessa, are you a fan of the trumpet?
Yeah. I'm not good at it, but I like to appreciate it.
Ah, nice.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, I've just been revisiting Miles Davis in the hard bop period, but anyway, that's another discussion. But within music, there's the notes, but there's also the space in between the notes. And isn't the space in between the notes as important in terms of the piece? So you can, as you enter into the musical accompaniment of See, Hear, Feel, you can spotlight the restfulness or the space in between the notes, and just see how that might make your experience overall a little less frenetic and maybe potentially more restful. And wow, Nicole's a fellow trumpeter as well. Boy, I didn't know there was all these trumpeters here. Yeah, just keep at it, Michael. And at a certain point, something will click, and it'll be good. And at any time you want to reach out, I think I put my email on the end there at the end of the class. Feel free to reach out. We can go over some details and stuff, and that's kind of an open invitation to anybody here.
Yeah, even if it's Miles Davis and listening to some of that.
Yeah. It's good stuff, man.
Thank you.
Stuff does not get old. All right. Thanks, Michael. Okay. So let's get into things. So last week, just to review, we were looking at emptiness through the Theravadan lens. And we're looking at, I guess, various suttas and various commentators. And oftentimes within the Theravadan lens, emptiness is spoken about in three different ways: as an attribute of objects, or the anatta component. So when a thought arises, oh, okay, that's really not me. That's not the locus of my identity. Here comes a certain sensation in the body. Okay, is that really the seat of me? No, that's just gas, to quote Michael before. There's this sense of, as things arise into consciousness, sorry to call you out, dude. As things arise in consciousness, are they really, truly, truly, truly yourself? So there's that way in which we can not see it clearly, and we can then grasp at it. We can apprehend the objects, and we grasp at it, and then we unknowingly begin to organize around it and begin to have a feeling that is ourself. Reference the last time you were in an argument, reference the last time somebody chewed you out publicly, reference the last time, what have you, where you find yourself getting caught, and you're really gripping to that idea, that momentum, that compulsion, that urge, that drive. So anatta is a very handy concept if we can increase our discernment to really recognize what is the content of our experience, and recognize, oh, truly, that is not necessarily me. That's the anatta. We're breaking our identification. We're disidentifying from something. And so that brings us into the second attribute of emptiness in the Theravadan tradition, which would be the concept of the awareness release. So there's that moment that I'm angry, and then it's just like, oh man, I'm just tripping about something. And then we just feel that flush, that of anger just kind of dissipate. That moment, it's just like you're walking down the street, you see like, oh, there's a snake, and you get all tense, and it's like, oh, that's just a rope. There's that release that can happen. Yeah. So there's all different ways where, those are kind of gross examples, but, subtle ways we can notice in our meditative experience that we might be gripping on something. There might be some kind of craving to pursue a particular idea that's entertaining, or some sort of aversive kind of closing up to our experience because there's something unpleasant happening. And when we break the identification, the anatta, that can help facilitate this easing, this awareness release. So it's like we're emptying out of that content. And if we can tend to that theme of emptying out, there's a releasing. There's a releasing of our stress. There's a releasing of our dukkha, which brings us then to that third attribute of emptiness within the Theravadan lens, which would be as a meditative dwelling. So if we can tend to that theme of just anatta, all right, that's not self, letting go of that. If I'm clinging to something and letting go of that constantly, I'm focusing on that releasing, that relinquishing. And then if there's never a picking up, then it's just like I'm focusing on the emptying out. The emptying out is the theme, so to speak. And I'm not apprehending any objects. I'm not grabbing, fixating anything. I'm constantly just emptying out. So that can be an actual meditative dwelling, not necessarily a meditative object because it's objectless. Yeah, so it's a dwelling. How can we abide in sunyata vihara, as they would say? So I would like to look at the other side of the court and look at emptiness through a little bit more of a Mahayana lens today. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into some screen sharing. Yes, here we go. Let's look at some Heart Sutra today. Heart Sutra, or the Heart of Perfect Wisdom, it's probably one of the most popular Mahayana texts, period. Chanted, millions of times per day by so many people practicing all around the world. In many ways, it kind of points to the two truths doctrine. So we see this in Buddhism. Let's see, in the Theravadan lens, that two truths doctrine is sometimes Buddha might talk about more conventional things, and then sometimes his teachings might be a little bit more of like a higher level teaching. So there's the conventional and the higher truths. In the Mahayana, my understanding is it takes it a little bit further, talking about different, realities, so to speak. There's the relative truths and the absolute truths. Yeah? And maybe depending on what truth you're abiding in, there's different laws that apply. Example, Newtonian physics versus quantum physics. Depending on kind of what level you're at, the rules are kind of different. So the relative truth, it relates to, phenomenal reality. We all agree that we're sitting here in our various and respective abodes, hanging out, listening to yours truly talk on. So that's the phenomenal reality that we are working in. And I was talking about relative truths, about like, hey, here's an idea, it triggers an emotion, et cetera, et cetera. This is the subjective experience of our reality. And this are kind of the truths that relate to it. And then we have the absolute truth in Mahayana, which describes more of an ultimate reality. So it's like the ontological truth. It's pointing to the reality of being. And in this way, they're focusing on the ultimate truth as sunyata, or emptiness. It's empty of any concrete or inherently individual characteristics, so to speak. Now then, that can sound a little abstract. So that's why I thought that would be interesting to go into the Heart Sutra a little bit today. It's set as a conversation, or really Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara is addressing Shariputra about the higher truth and the practice of perfect insight that allows one to go to the other shore. So from ignorance and suffering towards the shore of awakening, of enlightenment, of that absolute truth of emptiness, so to speak. So here we have the picture, Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of Compassion. This is a statue from, I believe, around 7th century AD. So Bodhisattva of Compassion, howsoever giving the teachings on the higher wisdom. Interesting. So right there, it's right there is this threading together of the wisdom and compassion, this very essential values within the Mahayana Buddhist system. And having this conversation with Shariputra in the Theravadan lens, he's referred to as Sariputta. The nickname he has that I like is the Dharma General. Is one of Buddha's main students, and a lot of the Theravadan suttas, where Buddha is speaking with Sariputta, a lot of it is conveying the higher teachings, or the teachings of wisdom. So I think it's very interesting that within this text, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of Compassion, is talking about the wisdom practices to the student of the Buddha who is most known for the wisdom practices. So it's a very interesting context there. So I'd like to do something a little bit different in that, hold on a second here. I'm kind of losing the control panels there. Here we go. So I'd like to do something a little different. I'd like to actually listen to the chanting of the Heart Sutra. I see Vanessa nodding there, so I think I guess you're a fan of this. So this comes from Plum Village. So this is Thich Nhat Hanh's Sangha chanting of the Heart Sutra, and I have the lyrics here so you can read along to it. It's actually quite beautiful. All right, can we go from the beginning? Everybody see this okay? Yeah, cool. All right, and read along.
The heart of the insight that brings us to the other shore. Avalokiteshvara, while practicing deeply with the insight that brings us to the other shore, suddenly discover that all of the five skandhas are equally empty, and with this realization he over them all will be. Listen, Shariputra, this body itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is this body. This body is none other than emptiness, and emptiness is none other than this body. The similitude of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. This is Shariputra, phenomena where the mark of emptiness, actual nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no definement, no purity, no perceptions and realize perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future, by practicing the inside out, brings us to the other shore. All capable of attaining authentic and perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Shariputra, it should be known that the inside out brings us to the other shore. It's a great mantra, the most illuminating mantra, the highest mantra, the mantra beyond compare, the true wisdom that has the power to put an end to all kinds of suffering. Therefore, let us proclaim a mantra to praise the inside that brings us to the other shore. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisattva. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisattva. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisattva.
Very cool.
The heart of the inside.
We're just
that
continuing on
brings
with
us to
the encore. Okay. So thank you for that. So pretty cool stuff. I enjoy listening to that that chanting myself. And it's interesting. So we see in this that Avalokiteshvara is addressing Shariputra and essentially listing all of these things, listing all of these qualities that are inherently empty. And so for anybody that's been studying the Dharma for a while, or anybody that's kind of gone through this series, probably some of these terms might not be unfamiliar to you. So I figured we can go through some of those as well. Essentially, in many ways, what's happening here is they're pointing out, or they're taking a tour of all the Buddhist concepts of potential materials that make up a sense of self, that make up a sense of I am. So in the beginning, the Bodhisattva was saying, all right, the five skandhas are equally empty. So this body equals emptiness, and emptiness equals the body. So body, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, they are inherently empty. They're something that exists somewhat in the relative world because they're dependently originated. Yeah. So remember, we're talking about the 12 links of dependent origination. These are things that are created, so to speak. When we look at, I didn't go much into them this go around, but I spoke about them in various quotes. So these are the five skandhas. So this is the aggregates, the different heaps, the different subsets, the materials that are the building block of the sense of self. We take away our roles, we take away our ideas, we take away our concepts of ourselves. So what do we have? We have consciousness, yeah. And then, there's the forms that arise within consciousness, and as we contact them, it brings about a feel tone. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? And then we'll have some sort of perception about it. That sound, what is that? Oh, that is a truck, probably a fire truck going on into a fire. And then all of these, we assign or attribute a perception to that experience, and then the mental formations start to pop up and give context, and then we start to form a sense of self around that thing. So moment by moment, these aggregates of self are constantly arising, coming into being, and that gives us a sense of self, so to speak. Or we can just recognize them for what they are, and there's no self that necessarily needs to arise around them. So some of them are a little bit familiar because they kind of mimic or have some overlap when we're looking at the 12 links of dependent origination. So, they go on to say there's no death, no being, no non-being, no defilements, no increasing, no decreasing. And the Bodhisattva goes on to say the 18 realms of phenomena. That sounds rather esoteric, but then they break it down. There's the six sense organs, the six sense objects, the six sense consciousnesses. Say all of that 5 times fast, as they are also not separate self entities. So, I talk about this often, sometimes really. There's the sense organ of the eye, and let's just say nothing's happening, and then boom, the sense object of the pen arises. Eye is making contact with this, and then so the eye consciousness is arising. So there's the sense organ, the sense consciousness that's making contact with the sense object. So seeing, hearing, taste, touch, smell, and then in Buddhism, mind. So it's essentially just as things are happening, like let's just say there's no sound. My ears are in remission, or the activity of ear consciousness is in remission. Suddenly there's a sound. So the ear organ or the sense organ is there, but it's not doing anything. But then with sound co-arises the awareness, the consciousness, that whole thing comes into being. So that is another way in which we can get a sense of self. Essentially, I believe as I opened up this whole series talking about the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. Within that space is our power to choose a response. And within our choice lies our potential for growth and freedom. I hope I didn't chop that up too much, but it's within that stimulus and response, there's that space. Well, what happens within that space? Well, then the aggregates all come in. Oh, it's form, it's consciousness, that's, there's a perception, and then the sankharas arise all around that. So in a way, what's being pointed to in this discussion is, well, yeah, those are not self either. They're empty. They're inherently empty. They're not something that exists on their own. They're dependently originated, and they for one of those things to exist, they depend upon some other phenomena to trigger that into being. And I think that's rather clear in that 18 realms of phenomena, because it's talking about these sequences and systems playing. And then, of course, at the base of it all, the 12 links of dependent origination. They say the 12 links of dependent arising. So I have the 12 links of dependent origination. So they say that's all relative phenomena. So that was our class that we did a couple of weeks ago when we can review that real quick. So this is one of the screens that we had where this realms or the rounds of rebirth that happen. So we have the avijja sankhara that's there. The sankharas that are the sense impressions, but they also have that subtle suggestion of habit material just waiting to come into being. And the avijja is the not knowing, the ignorance that's waiting. And then we have consciousness, the mind body, the 6 senses, contact and feel tone. They have some overlap of the aggregates there in a way, but this is a little bit more of a sequential process. Then as something comes into contact with consciousness, then the feel tone happens and it starts to address or shake the avijja sankhara into being. And it's just like, what is the habit pattern? What is the reactivity of self that's waiting to happen? And then there's tanha, or thirst, or the craving, the aversion, the unconsciousness. Then we cling to that idea, that concept, that feeling, that emotion, that drive, that belief. And then we start going down the birth canal of becoming, then birth, boom. We have the particular manifestation of self, of that ego state, of that mood state, of that activity. That's one particular way that I was looking at giving the context of that teaching. So in the sutta, they're saying, yeah, no, sorry, that's empty. And yeah, we're seeing it's just this process, this activity. But in a way, it's pointing to that relative truth that, I can see how in this world I'm hanging out and everything's fine. There's the telephone ring. I look at the number. Ooh, that's not the person I want to call. Then I'm thinking about a memory. The aversion comes up, and then I just get into a state. It's just like, yeah, within the relative world, these are the problems that we have. These are the things. Something comes up, we react to it, and then we get gripped. We form a whole self around it, so to speak. But what they're saying is they're pointing to the other side of that. Is yeah, well, they're inherently empty. All of these things, the activity of dependent origination itself is empty. It's dependently originated. It's depending on something else, but none of this is a separate self entity. And then they go on in the sutra to talk about, the Four Noble Truths. They're saying there's no ill being, the cause, the end, the path. They too are not separate self entities. So it's interesting because they're taking all of these higher teachings of Buddhism, or higher teachings in the sense of these are kind of the wisdom teachings, and they're saying, yep, there ain't no self in that. It's interesting because so many people that are kind of more on the early Buddhist or Theravadan side of the game tend to be like, oh, that's Mahayana, and they might dismiss the Heart Sutra as like, oh yeah, it's playing for the other team. We're going to dismiss that, which is absurd because everything that's being addressed here are foundational teachings within Theravadan or early Buddhism as well. So I find that it's something that really addresses well these concepts that are shared in early and later Buddhism. Then they go on to say, whoever sees this no longer needs anything to attain, who practice the insight that brings us to the other shore. There's no more obstacles in their mind because there are no more obstacles. There are not more obstacles in our mind. Yeah. So what does that mean? The thingness, the substantiality is gone. If we can rest within the activity of our subjective experience, and we can be, if now I'm waxing into describing the meditation practice, if we can be so present with the activity of our experience, there's that sound, and I'm just so present with the sound arising and just kind of that activity of contact and the impact. There's no time or space for a self to emerge, to kind of abut against that, and then we form a personality view. I'm just riding this crest of present time awareness. So there's no obstacle in the mind. There's nothing that catches, that grips. It's all just an activity. Going back to it, so that's the way to overcome all fear, destroy all wrong perception, realize the perfect nirvana. So gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gone, gone, everyone gone to the other shore. Awakening, svaha, this kind of, it is so. So that's pretty much kind of just a bit of a tour of what was being brought. And I just say it as a little bit of an overview, since we're kind of winding down it's a little bit of a review in many ways of all the different topics that we covered within this series. So there's some disputes around it. Sometimes it's regarded as being written somewhere between 750 to 1200 CE in India, and then there are some other individuals that come forth and say that it was actually written quite later in China and was back translated into Sanskrit to try to give it that sense of that, it being kind of like an original sutra. There's this one, I was listening to a podcast, Michael Taft's Deconstructing Self podcast, and he was interviewing Jayarava Atwood of the Triratna order, Buddhist order. it was an interesting little something that was being discussed there that I wanted to um, bring up. Yeah. Where he's talking about, there's a little bit of a translation thing. Now, then, this is all stuff here that's well above my pay grade here, where he's talking about different types of characters in Chinese as well, you know, their translation into Sanskrit back and forth, that gives slightly different meanings here. So so again, that's kind of above my pay grade, all of that different types of translating. But with this one thing that he was found that if the translation is a little bit different, rather than saying there is no X, Y, and Z, that ultimate reality, is the translation is different as in the state of emptiness. So that brings us back to in the meditative dwelling of emptiness. So then that gives a little bit of a different angle to it. So in the state of emptiness, if we were to abide in a meditative dwelling of emptiness, then there's no appearance, no feeling, no recognition, no karma, no producing of volitions, no discrimination, through the exercise of non-apprehension of the dharmas, or the non-clinging, the non-grasping. So then that starts to kind of dovetail a little bit back, more kind of agreement to early Buddhists. So it's rather than an ontological statement of this is the true nature of reality as being empty. Well, it points to, well, this is the true subjective nature of our experience when we're able to rest in sunyata vihara, or rest in emptiness as an abiding state. So just to quote, so if Osborne is correct, that's the researcher who's coming across this. And apart from one caveat that I will discuss below, I think he is then the fact that there is no appearance, etc., while in the state of emptiness, consistent with early Buddhist descriptions of such states, then the text is saying that this comes about through the exercise of non-perception. Osborne noted that this shifts the emphasis away from the usual metaphysical reading of the Heart Sutra promoted by many Buddhists. The text is not simply stating that there is no form. Instead, it is saying that when one is doing Buddhist practices that involve withdrawing attention from experience, then experience can cease and leave one in a state of contentless awareness. This state is also known as emptiness or absence, sunyata. And this is completely consistent with my own reading of the text using Sue Hamilton's, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's just kind of an interesting thing to take in. There's different ways that we can, how should we say, translate or interpret that. Is it a commentary on the true nature of reality? Or is it a commentary on our subjective experience when we're meditating? I think that, well, it's still, even if it is or isn't the true nature of reality, emptiness, still all I know is what is happening in my skin and behind my eyes and between my ears. That's all I know. And so for me personally, just resting into the subjective experience, I think that's enough really, because ultimately going back to Buddhists saying that I only teach one thing, suffering and the cessation of suffering. For me, the practice of emptiness, being able to abide in a state of non-apprehension, is kind of the pinnacle of being able to be in a place of not suffering. Or put otherwise, here we go. Put otherwise, if not a truth of reality, but a subjective experience, what's its value? So then going back to this, anatta, the not self, moment by moment. Oh, this nagging thought, yeah, that's not me. Oh, this emotion that's trying to overcome and well me, there's this depression. Well, yeah, it's happening. And it doesn't necessarily need to invoke tons of second arrow hypertrophy of more suffering around it. If I can get into the awareness release, the meditative abiding, if I can go through the day in this place of emptiness, I'm empty of all of this reactivity. Well, contrast that to the alternative, going through the day, being assailed by rumination, constantly thinking heavily about every single thing and being caught in these cognitive loops, going through the day with an emotional overwhelm, feeling the emotions strongly assail us, and then have all of our reactivity come up. Yeah? So, these are the expressions of dukkha in many ways, subjectively. If I'm experiencing dukkha, if I'm experiencing suffering, that's what it looks like. Tons of preoccupation with rumination and overwhelm with emotions, and it's triggering all of my reactive patterns. Versus, well, yeah, the experience of anatta, awareness, release, and a meditative abiding. That is, I'd say, the expression of having um, um, uh, some agency around discerning your experience, non-identifying with it in a way that produces suffering, and then allowing yourself to just tend to the theme of emptying out. So, having said that, how about we do a little bit of practice of not attending to themes? But before we go into the sit, does anybody have any questions about anything discussed? I know that was just kind of a big kind of dump there, but anything come up for anyone here?
Yeah. Why is it called the Heart Sutra when they don't talk about heart or anything? Let's.
The heart of wisdom, yeah, or what is the actual long form? The heart of the perfect wisdom, yeah. So there's the perfect wisdom, and then there's the heart of it, right at the center of it. So talking about the heart or the center uh, of the wisdom teachings, so to speak. So just in a way, so sometimes they talk about heartwood. It's just like when you cut this slice of wood, it's just like right at the center of it. So that like that sense of the heart, not necessarily like the heart as like love and meaning and sentiment, so to speak, but just more like the crux or the essence. That's how it comes up for me. Yeah, and of course I'm open to any other people's interpretations too. Yeah. Okay. Good. Anybody else? Yeah. All right. So let's get into doing a sit. Last week we were looking at this self-inquiry practice. So that was the see, hear, feel back exercise. So again, looking at this thing here, I have a sense of an I am, or my perception is kind of here, the locus of my head and self. I hear something. It's like an arrow of awareness is extending out, contacting that sound. I'm seeing this pen. My locus of awareness is reaching out and contacting the pen. In all the different ways that we're contacting experience, can we walk back down that arrow towards that which is perceiving it? The eye that is perceiving, okay, rather than focusing on all the details of the pen, can I be aware of this faculty of awareness of seeing? The activity of seeing, where is this originating? Same thing within hearing, same thing within feeling. So in a way, we're kind of walking back down the arrow. We're walking back towards kind of the kind of where awareness originates, so to speak. One of the ideas with this is, it's self-inquiry, because it's like we're looking at this whole, organism of self that's perceiving, and how is it? What is it? It's a self-inquiry practice. But also, there's something about it that's kind of emptiness-inducing, because rather than tending to the themes out there, so to speak, we're just kind of resting in kind of that core initial early awareness. And that helps to provide a sense of rest within the seeing, hearing, feeling. And it tends to, we're becoming less interested in the activity So it does tend to bring this anatta, this disidentification. It tends to facilitate this awareness release and a potential abiding in emptiness. So let's do that experiment. So allow yourself to come to a comfortable upright position. We'll be practicing a little bit of insight and self inquiry, but we can start off with cultivating some shamatha as we find our way towards the breath. Tending to the breath in whatever way that you enjoy. Or, if you'd like, just allow yourself to be aware of the in breath, the top of the in breath, the out breath, the base of the out breath. So the simple contact with the mechanical experience of breathing in and out, and also the pleasant feel tones that come in those different points. What are the pleasant sensations that arise, the pleasant mental states that arise? That's unique to breathing in, to reaching the top of the in breath, to breathing out and reaching the base of the out breath. Okay, good. Know that breath is always there. You can always return to breath at any time or keep breath within your focus. Now let's open up this focus a little wider to include all the feeling space of the body and as well the activity of the mind. Within mental activity, there is that which we see, the images that rise and fall associated with planning, fantasy, daydream. Most people report this mental picture screen is somewhere around the eyes, the forehead. Let's have partial awareness in this seeing space. And partial awareness in the other aspect of thought, the words that we hear, the conversations, commentary, dialogues. Most people report this auditory thinking takes place between the ears. So partial awareness in hearing space. And just allow your awareness to free float between seeing, hearing, and feeling. You can either just silently be aware of and discern, note to yourself what you're primarily in contact with. Or if you prefer a labeling set, just observe this awareness. Where is it drawn to see, hear, feel, and label accordingly? So it might sound like this: feel, see, feel and see, hear, and so on like that. Whatever arises, whatever you make contact with, can you bring that sense of equanimity, acceptance, openness, kindness to it? As you're free floating between seeing, hearing, and feeling, you withdraw a little bit. Rather than when the sound arises, rather than being more transfixed in what you're hearing, but can you pull back into what is the flavor of this, just this consciousness, this awareness, this source of hearing? As the image arises, can you see back, pull your awareness back into what is this faculty of awareness? That is the nature of seeing. And as you are feeling the sensations, the emotions, what have you, can you feel back? What is the flavor of this awareness that feels? Which understandably, this is a little nebulous, and that's okay. A little bit of groping around in the dark, a little bit of guessing. It's all okay to not be sure. It's okay to guess. This is subtle work, but just trying to pull back your awareness to notice this faculty of awareness that does engage in the seeing and hearing, the feeling. If you prefer to just silently be aware, you can do that. If you prefer to use a labeling set, it's see back, hear back, feel back. So there can still be a lot of mental activity. That's perfectly normal. But rather than being interested or entranced by the images and the internal talk, can you walk back down that arrow? The images that arise, can you be more interested in just the faculty of seeing internally? The internal talk that arises, can you become more interested in that faculty of awareness that hears instead? That tends to give a little bit of distance, that tends to potentially induce rest. And if you are more inclined to fall into the restful states right now, can you appreciate that emptying out? As the images, the see, hear, feel content arises, we could recognize it as not self. Observing the passing away from being, the relinquishing, the not picking up. This is the awareness release of emptying out. And to whatever degree there is an absence of content in see, hear, and feel, can you appreciate that? That absence of stress, and maybe even the presence of a sense of well being. Whatever arises, can we meet it with that equanimity, that kindness? Those qualities can become our content. Okay. Welcome back. Post-bell practice, allowing yourself to still receive the merits of your actions. We're just opening our eyes and allowing there to be concepts and possibly talking. So, what did you notice? What did you observe? What was relevant for you? And of course, any questions about it, the practice, feel free to just unmute yourself and manifest.
Well, as the chanting was going on, a call happened, which I shouldn't have taken, but I was drawn to it, which was a very stressful call. And then starting to meditate, right? And last week I didn't, last week I kind of went a different direction with this, where I was much more like, who is thinking, feeling, and hearing? Who's the who? And this time I got this idea, I suppose, with the back, that because I had a lot of moments where I didn't feel much of, it felt kind of empty, and then I had the moments where I saw or felt, and it was helpful to kind of because they were in contrast, it really struck me more than ever about how those the feeling states, and usually with the seeing and the hearing, there's feeling states that are having too, and that it is not me. There was a bit of a sense of, I could understand how that could be, where so, and that was then very kind of moving that I could get there for a moment. And then get overwhelmed again by the feeling, and then kind of watch it a little bit and kind of see it as not me. So that it was it's really kind of interesting, and I'm grateful, for it. So thank you.
How would you describe that contrasting experience of the overwhelm or the content versus the emptying out and the disidentification of self? How would you describe that other experience of emptying when those moments did arise?
Well, uh, it it is so much the truth, because it is where I'm at. I mean, literally, I'm not seeing what I was seeing, and I'm not hearing what I was hearing, and I may be feeling what I was feeling, but I mean, that was about what just happened in the past or fears of the future, but it wasn't now. I don't know if that was answering the question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And but then, would you say those moments of emptying out, there was more of that sense of now?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. That is, I'm right here. I'm literally here. Um, I'm in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in this moment, and all the other things were not this moment.
Yeah, good.
That's what was that I could see that. I see it. I don't know. I could experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
So yeah.
So, sometimes all of this stuff is presented as very esoteric and something so very far down the line. But I mean, if we can just allow ourselves to just kind of play around with the themes, then it's possible to experience them, even if it's just for a few moments. But then
And then
once we,
and then immediately as you're talking, like doubt just roars in. It was like just like a freight train. Like, oh yeah, oh you're so high and mighty. You had a moment that won't last. I mean, it was like it wasn't. I mean, it was it's kind of like that. It's like
well, the reason that I'm laughing that you said that doubt just roars in, because that's part of the interesting thing of the insight practice is, okay, the self, and we're just kind of letting those things go. Oh, look at that. There's no self happening. I'm kind of empty. That's kind of interesting and fun. And then, boom, who shows up? Usually, who shows up first to get more of this solid sense of self is a reactive pattern. So, can we have a little bit of that kind of anatta, just knowing that the first self that's going to rise is usually the reactive pattern. It's usually going to be the annoying guest that shows up at the party. So can we have some anatta there, and maybe even kind of look at that sense that wants to say, "Oh yes, that's me. I'll take that," and give it, put it in the captain's chair. So this is part of the post-bell practice of allowing yourself to receive and not cut off from the practice, because sometimes it's the experience of emptying out, and it's a liberating, or has the qualities of well-being. But then there's a part of ourselves there that's experiencing that petite ego death. That's like, oh no 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 no. I got to be me, and I only know if I'm me if I'm frustrated, or if I'm doubtful, or if I'm overwhelmed. And so those are the patterns that say, oh, if we trigger this, then I know I have a solid sense of me in this world. So it makes sense that the doubt would then roll in right on the heels of emptiness. But
and
can you?
I'm getting his number, the doubt's number. I'm getting.
You
I'm
get it.
just like I've been working on doubt now for a while. It's been kind of like it's been a year and a half of doubt that I'm really aware of doubt, and it's like, you fucker,
Yeah.
you're not so tricky anymore. That was pretty obvious, that one. Even I heard that one. So yeah.
Just parse that one down to what part is seeing, what part is hearing, what part is feeling. Bring that equanimity to each of that, and just observe how that disassembles. The
I'm
anatta.
sorry, I didn't follow that. Could you say that again?
Oh, well, when doubt arises, what part is seeing, what part is hearing, what part
Uh-huh.
is feeling?
Right.
Then the anatta will follow, and then the awareness release, and then the emptying,
Remind me, the anatta is the
breaking of identification, the
uh,
disidentification from it.
and can I ask you one question about self?
Mhm.
Because we're not talking about the self. We're talking about various selves arising. Like this would be a, something happens, you have a reaction to it, a self arises, but we're not talking about the self, right? You're talking about something, it's a little different quality to it, right?
Well, I mean, is there a solid, consistent self?
Yeah, well,
Who is it that's driving right now? Who is it that's perceiving? I think within Buddhist psychology, there's that idea that we have a perception that there's a solid, independent self, but when we put it under the microscope and really look, it tends to fall apart. So when I was going through those different lists, there's the different aggregates of consciousness and form and perception, mental formations, etc. Those things are there in the moment, but they don't necessarily need to form a self, because they can be seen as separate activities. And then when we look at those selves coming into being, sometimes they're stronger, sometimes they're not so strong. And when we look at it through the lens of dependent origination, it's just like, no, I'm just kind of hanging out in the senses. Oh, wait, there's something interesting. Oh, I'm kind of gripping. And we can kind of see the birth of a self, or an ego state, so to speak.
but
So,
an ego state is different than a self. An ego, for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is that I always get lost in this idea, and I feel like I ask this question in all these different realms about it, and I never feel solid.
Mhm.
I don't have a, because I'm losing my sense of self. Of course I don't feel solid. But uh, again, when from Buddhist psychology perspective, there is no, what is the definition of self?
Say that it's more of less of a noun and more of a verb.
Changing. Is that
Just
what,
constant activity that's
yeah.
occurring. That could have various degrees of density. Like water can show up as ice, or it could show up as liquid, or it could show up as gas. The experience of self can be very solid like ice, or it can be very kind of wispy and formless like gas, and kind of not really enough to kind of cohere together into something. But it can move through these different transitions. So it's an ever moving, ever changing experience. Yeah. And then there are times when, if we can abide in a meditative dwelling of emptiness, where it doesn't seem like there's much of one at all. And then what's interesting in that is we're cultivating certain conditions to let go of that. So then when a certain self wants to arise, that is inherently dukkha oriented or suffering oriented, such as the doubt. That's a whole kind of self that's kind of like, I'm doubting myself. If that can, it's like if that enters into kind of that non-self experience, then it might tend to kind of disassemble itself. And that's when it becomes practical, if we can kind of deconstruct an afflictive ego state. But then what do we return to? Do we return to a more healthy ego, or do we return to a non-self? And so there's this way in which it's like it part of the practice is knowing how to kind of, disassemble the self into emptiness, and part of the practice is knowing how to, manifest fully a strong and fluid and capable self as well. So it's kind of like we're like amphibious in nature. We can hang out in water, we can hang out in land. We know how to kind of go into the formless and then go into form.
And the solid one, where we become the solid self when we want to, I'm not sure what you mean. What's the purpose?
Well, I forget the teacher, but they said, we need really as much of a self to just kind of, not walk into walls. You know, we need as much of a solid self to know how to drive a car and not get into a car accident.
Well, I think Ram Dass said something like you need to know about the infinite universe and your social security number.
Yeah. So then back to the two truths then, yeah? The relative and the absolute in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you. I want to leave a little bit for anybody else have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because to that point about you need a self to do stuff. And I was in like some Zoom call real quick that was about self-inquiry and non-duality, and he said the reason that this ego exists at all is because in nature we need to be able to feel like we are the body, because there's a practical purpose to saying, oh, I'm terrified of getting eaten. And so that was just an interesting thing you guys said. But there's definitely there's an overload or a bad side to being extremely attached to that, which is being enveloped with the sense of like these thoughts and these whatever phenomena you're experiencing. To go on a tangent here, when I was meditating, I noticed that the idea of impermanence really kind of juxtaposed my ability to identify with the awareness and the phenomena, or what you want to call it, the hearing and seeing and feeling, because I noticed that, like, yeah, I'm going through all these thoughts. I got all these tumultuous memories popping up. But wait, while that is all moving and changing in my mind's eye, what have you, I'm actually watching this happen.
Hmm.
And that's the one thing that's not changing. It's the one thing that's not shifting around.
Hmm.
Same with my whatever feelings I was going through. The temperature is altering. But I'm like, yeah, this is going on. So something, but what's not changing is this sense that this is going on.
Hmm.
Um, like a knowing, a knowing.
Good.
So I think your tips earlier really helped with that. The city, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good. So like, yeah, earlier when we were talking and you were saying, yeah, you're like kind of at the end of the whip, kind of being flailed around. So, all right, can you kind of walk back down a little bit? And it's just like, all right, you're at the stable point, kind of observing it. And there's
yeah.
a little bit more stability in that sense of the observer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the difference between, I don't know, it's just like being grounded and witnessing, I don't know, everything going on, a flame while, I don't know, when the wind's blowing hard but the flame's not changing.
Hmm.
It's just like, that's how I would describe that experience. So yeah, but it's hard to maintain. Oh my God.
It's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Because all the sensory input, the sensory activity is still happening. And then there's various degrees of charge that could kind of grip us or repel us depending on. So, but good. For both you, Michael and Robert, just having now that the history of experience of having tasted that, that's cultivating the palate. So then, next time it's like, oh, that's something to look for or be open to, or remember what the conditions were that you created that invited in that space. And then, then we start to be able to talk about state to trait mindfulness. There's the temporary state versus the increased frequency and duration of that. Then that becomes a little bit more hardwired into our baseline experience. And then that becomes kind of a trait that's built into us. So good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time, your attention. Let's see. Let me go into things. So, as we wind down, just want to say these teachings are freely offered, going old school Dana system. So, yeah, I like to give in my dedication of merit, talking about that sense of lineage. I mean, these teachings of the Dharma were offered, from the beginning, freely, a Dana system. There used to be a symbiotic, well, there are, and still certain Buddhist cultures where the monks would go around and they would beg for alms, and then the villagers and people would give food, and there's that symbiotic relationship of the village people would take care of the physical needs of the monks, and the monks would take care of the spiritual needs of the people. And there is that reciprocity there within that Dana system. So today, we're trying to in the West figure this out. Not have it be a for-profit model, which tends to taint things, but have that sense of Dana, where the teachings are freely offered, and there's that opportunity for individuals to practice generosity. So, if you go to the Insight LA homepage. Missing that link again, but if you go to Inside LA page, it will have the options and opportunities to donate. You can look up this class and you can donate there. Um, and also, I invite everybody here to um, Monday through Friday. I have a meditation class that is 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Um, Pacific time, which we go over different facets of the practice. So it's a lovely group. So people are welcome to join in there. Um, and otherwise, yeah, homework for everybody. Can you, as you go through the day tomorrow, kind of pull back the awareness? What is the nature of what is seeing, what is hearing, what is feeling? And just rest in that, and not necessarily need to delve into the content of the rumination or the content of the emotion. And what is that like to be able to hold that position? So let's see how that goes. I look forward to hearing your reports next week. In the meantime, let us end with a dedication of merit. By the merits of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain a liberation for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who come before us on the path, and to those who come after us on the path. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate sitting with all of you. Have yourselves a wonderful week. Take care.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Tell the possums good night for me.
Oh, yeah, the possums. They're out there.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Good night. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.